stood in my parents' living room, diploma in hand, as my mom smiled and said, "Now it's time for you to pay us back." My dad chimed in, "You owe us $30,000 plus interest." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I stood in my parents' living room, diploma in hand, as my mom smiled and said, "Now it's time for you to pay us back." My dad chimed in, "You owe us $30,000 plus interest." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Just hours before, I had walked off the stage, degree in hand, thinking that this was the start of my new life. Little did I know, my parents had other plans. As I look back on my childhood, I realized that my parents had always been a bit unconventional. They had always been supportive of my education, but also very keen on reminding me of the sacrifices they had made for me. My dad would often say things like, "We've given up so much for you, now it's time for you to give back." I had always assumed he was just talking about the usual parental sacrifices, but now I was starting to realize that he had a very different idea of what that meant. I tried to reason with them, explaining that I had worked hard to get scholarships and grants to cover most of my tuition, but they just waved it off, saying that they had still had to sacrifice by not being able to spend as much money on themselves. I did the math in my head, trying to figure out how they had come up with the $30,000 figure. It seemed to me that they were including things like food, housing, and other expenses that I had always assumed were just part of being a parent. My mom pulled out a spreadsheet detailing all of the expenses they had incurred over the years. It was a staggering amount, but I still couldn't help but feel that this was unfair. I had worked hard to get good grades, to get into a good college, and to graduate with honors, and now they were demanding that I pay them back. It didn't seem right. As the conversation went on, I started to feel a sense of unease. I had always tried to be a good son to make my parents proud, but now I was starting to realize that their idea of proud was very different from mine. They didn't care about my accomplishments or my happiness. All they cared about was getting paid back. I tried to explain to them that I didn't have $30,000, that I had student loans to pay off and an entry-level job that barely covered my living expenses. But they just wouldn't listen. They kept saying things like, "You're making good money now, you can afford it." And, "We've sacrificed so much for you, it's the least you can do." I felt like I was being backed into a corner with no way out. I didn't want to give them the money, but at the same time, I didn't want to fight with them on my graduation day. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I agreed to pay them back, but only if they would accept a payment plan. My mom smiled, seeming to think that she had won. "We'll take $500 a month," she said, "and if you're late with a payment, we'll charge you interest." I felt a surge of anger, but I bit my tongue. I knew that if I stood up to them now, it would only lead to more conflict. So I agreed to their terms. But as I left their house that day, I knew that I would never be able to go back to the way things were before. I had seen a side of my parents that I never knew existed, and it had shaken me to my core. Over the next few months, I struggled to make the payments. I had to take on a second job just to make ends meet, and I was constantly stressed about money. But I was determined to pay them back, no matter what it took. As the months went by, I started to notice that my parents were changing. They were becoming more and more demanding, asking for more and more money. They would call me multiple times a day, asking when the next payment would be made. And if I was late, they would send me angry texts, threatening to charge me interest. I realized that I had made a mistake by agreeing to their terms. I had given them a sense of control over me, and now they were using it to manipulate me. So I made the decision to stop paying them. I knew it would be hard, but I also knew that it was the only way to break free from their grasp. The fallout was immediate. My parents were furious, demanding that I pay them back. They sent me angry texts and emails, threatening to cut me out of their lives if I didn't comply. But I stood firm, refusing to back down. It was a difficult time, but I knew that I had made the right decision. I was finally taking control of my life, and I was determined to never let anyone else dictate my finances again. As the months went by, I started to rebuild my life. I got a new job, one that paid better and allowed me to save money. I started to pursue my passions, and I even started dating again. And as I look back on my experiences with my parents, I realized that I had learned a valuable lesson. I had learned that family is not just about blood ties, but about the relationships we build with the people around us. And I had learned that sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to stand up for ourselves, even if it means going against the people we love. It's been a few years now since I stopped paying my parents back, and you know what? I'm thriving. I've got a good job, a loving partner, and a sense of freedom that I never thought possible. And as for my parents, they're still angry, but I've learned to let it go. I've realized that their behavior was never about me, but about their own insecurities and fears. So to anyone who is going through a similar situation, I would say this: don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't be afraid to say no, even if it's to the people you love. Because in the end, it's the only way to truly be free.